Oi, oi, it's your boy, Absentee Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you later in the week because I was out adventuring. I had planned to record the podcast from my hotel room, but I got delayed 4 hours on a journey, so I didn't. And then I thought no one's going to want to hear about the fights from Saturday on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, so I'll record it Thursday. So here we are on Thursday talking about fights from Saturday night, but also talking about the fights upcoming this weekend, because I don't know if you know, but I found out, to my shock, that Bellator is still going, and they've got an event on it. It's actually really good. But, you know, it'll end in a variety of comical ways. There can't be a genuinely good on-the-night Bellator event, because that would be like Tony Habib. The world would just explode if it happened. But UFC 295, I mean, pretty close to all-timer on event enjoyment for me. Not quite UFC 217. Could have done with John Jones kicking the shit out of a retired old man, if I'm honest. Now, who was there, like, at the end of that going, oh, if only John Jones had kicked the shit out of retired old Stipe Miocic and then retired immediately afterwards. The whole thing about Aspinall versus Pavlovich being for the interim title, it's so stupid. You know, Tom Aspinall is the heavyweight champion of the world. And I'm not just saying that because I'm British. Don't care. Sergei Pavlovich would have been the heavyweight champion of the world if he won. The one that John Jones is walking around with, once you've signalled your intention to not actually defend it against a current contender and to retire after your next fight, I feel like you're not really the champion anymore. And I felt the same about Michael Bisping versus George St. Pierre when Rob Whittaker and Yoel Romero were taking lumps out of each other for an interim belt. But if you didn't read it, and you're a Patreon boy, you should have read it. How the article dropped on Sunday, how Alex Pereira killed the king. Featured some of the stuff from this card that I enjoyed, not just the Alex Pereira fight, because there wasn't an awful lot to that, even though it went almost 2 rounds. There's a lot of stuff I didn't talk about in that article, which I'm going to talk about today. And let's jump into it. Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka. Calf kicks, we talked about them on the Boycast. I said, this is a fairly new thing for him, calf kicks. He went his whole glory career and didn't throw any calf kicks. But he also went his whole glory career learning new things. He would bring things in fight to fight. He wasn't ever like the finished product, and he was still beating people, which is very impressive. There are a lot of people who have what they're going to be good at sit in place, and then they do their title run, they win their title, and then they just do the same things until they get older and slower, and then they lose. Or someone whose skill set matches up perfectly comes along. Alex Pereira turned up with a left hook because he was a boxer originally, or he had boxed. And then he started learning more things, like using the low kick to set up the left hook, using the high kick to set up the left hook, the jumping knee, front kick, stepping knees. Never the calf kick in his kickboxing career. And it's not because it doesn't work in kickboxing, because even the most ardent kickboxing elitists will admit now the calf kick has actually changed kickboxing a fair amount. If you watch any J-kick, there's a calf kick knockout on every other card now. You got guys like Yuki Yoza using calf kicks to drop people. Nongo, a very successful stadium Nak Muay, did it in 4-ounce Muay Thai against Liam Harrison, another very successful traditional Muay Thai kickboxer. It's real. But what I like about the Alex Pereira one, which Israel Adesanya could be seen talking to him about behind the scenes after their most recent fight, he was saying, how do you do that kick? And Pereira showing him, and the whole thing is that, like, it's kind of like how he used to throw his kick to the thigh and his kick to the head, holding his right hip back, because then he's on balance, ready to throw his left hook immediately. You can do like a big full round kick with your right leg and turn it over and then swing it all the way back and throw a left hook, and you feel like you're adding a load of power to it. But what you're really adding is time. And by throwing it and holding the leg back, you can throw the left hook almost immediately, which, of course, is always going to be an Alex Pereira priority. And, of course, it did, in fact, win the fight for him, after all the calf kicks had worked. The left hook was what won the fight. And I think the words that I used on the Boycast were, in punching exchanges, the left hook will look after all that, or something like that. Because, like, when you've got the banging left hook versus the sort of wild swinging of Jiri Prochazka, as soon as you get into a trade, you've got a great chance of knocking him out. It was Jiri's job to be sensible and pick his moments, and we'll do that in a second. Sorry, back to the calf kick. Yeah, worked wonderfully. If you watch him, he's holding his hip back the whole time. One of the interesting things is that when he misses, as when Prochazka pulls his leg out of the way, which he very rarely did, he still throws himself off balance because he's still throwing his leg, which is like a quarter of your body weight, as hard as he can. So when he missed, he'd kick across himself and have to do sort of a weird step and turn around, and he'd be out of position. But when he hit, his leg was always back on the ground before Prochazka's, and of course it was buckling Prochazka's leg almost immediately, the stance. The first one wasn't that bad. That was the one that everyone was like, oh my God, these calf kicks, they're killing him, because Prochazka was out of position and his leg was floating when he got kicked. But the other ones just took him apart very quickly. The Prochazka's low kick stuff was really interesting in the come up to this fight. We were talking about it on the Boycast, but never checks low kicks, never avoids low kicks, vulnerable to low kicks because he stands long as a choice so that he can counterpunch, and he can, if you watch any of his Rising fights, he did a lot of jab, jump back, right hand as the opponent's over the top of the opponent's counter. But it's the same thing that Ankalaev is now being found to have trouble with. He had it against Jan Blachowicz, who's a very scary guy, but then he did it against Johnny Walker, he's supposed to be levels above, and he's still getting his leg chewed up because he won't stand in a way where he can check the kicks or move his leg. He likes to stand nice and wide so that he can throw a counterpunch immediately or bounce back and throw a counterpunch. Whereas if you watch Pereira's stance, he's very high in his stance, always has been in kickboxing, but he's very tall in his stance because him and Adesanya are both 6'4", I believe, and Adesanya stands long, so his head's always way lower than Pereira's in their fights. But Pereira stands high and with his feet quite close together, and then when he needs to avoid a kick or a takedown, because Jiri was reaching for the lead leg to fake takedowns and come with uppercuts and things, the Mendes special, Pereira just pulls his leg back underneath him. Now, the thing about this fight was, I think anytime someone gets knocked out in a title fight, everyone's mind immediately goes, oh, well, there's no way they'd ever win that fight. There's levels. There's levels to this. And the people who listen to the podcast regularly know how much I hate the expression, there are levels to this. There was stuff that Jiri Prochazka could have done in this fight. The way that Alex Pereira dealt with everything, from low kicks to reaches for his legs to just punches, he just retreated. And you can watch him. There are several points in this fight where Jiri Prochazka follows him a little bit, and he just backs himself all the way up to the cage immediately. And there's a moment the takedown comes on the fence in the first round, and then in the second round, he manages to enter with a good right hand and then go into the clinch. And that would have been good. If Jiri Prochazka could get Pereira to the fence, enter with a big jab overhand or a right straight left hook or something like that, something big, or do his wave the hand and teep, kick him back into the fence, and then press in chest to chest and wrestle him a bit, and then break free and do the same again, that would have been good. The problem was that he worked out cornering Pereira was a good idea in the second round, and then he did it and stood there. So he threw this big wide overhand, which either hit Pereira or hit his guard. I can't remember whether it was a good connection or not. But Pereira came back with the right hand and the left hook, and the left hook knocked him out. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about this fight was how little Pereira was punching. Obviously, if the leg is open and the guy's not doing anything about it, you just do that. You're like, there's a tendency to overthink amongst technicians. If the other guy isn't doing anything about something, you just have to hammer it again and again and again until he does change something. But Pereira refused to punch even when Prochazka was leaning well forward. Prochazka does this thing where he's got this long stance and then he puts his head over his lead leg because he wants you to swing at his head, and he's got his hands down too because he wants to either slip to the inside and throw something across the top or pull and come back. It's Roy Jones used to do it a lot. Anderson Silva used to do it a lot. Or you call it presenting a fake distance. If you do it subtly, if you lean over your lead foot, if the guy's looking at your upper body, it's not actually that close because your upper body is right over your hips when you stand up. So you start from a leaning forward position, you put yourself close to them, and then when they reach out at you, you lean all the way back, and you can do really good pull counters and things from there, or you can slip to the inside and throw the overhand across the top, as I've said. But Prochazka was going forward being like, please swing at my head. And Alex Pereira was like, no, I'm going to circle out and kick your calf again because you're not doing anything about it. So new world champion, Alex Pereira, second division, light heavyweight champion, probably least takedowns defended. It's been done in like the least fights, but also least takedowns defended, which is part of it. I mean, I think Alex Pereira is a great example of this, but Brock Lesnar was back in the day. But a lot of high-level fighting is the matchups. And if you control the matchups carefully, provided you've got a world-class fighter, you can get them better achievements and accolades than other guys who spend time grinding and having to win 100 fights to get a title shot and stuff. There is a lot of favoritism in this game. There's a lot of put your finger on the scale. Alex Alex Pereira winning a second world title is very impressive, but it doesn't really mean as much as what someone would normally have to do to win a world title. Not to shit on him, because he's one of my favourite fighters, and I think he's terrific. And the fact that he has like the best left hook in kickboxing history and now the best left hook in MMA history, and he continues to like put that on the shelf and do smarter things and really pick people apart, very impressive. Jamahal Hill was in the audience, and Jamahal Hill called out both the new light heavyweight and heavyweight champions, and people were just like, shut up, Jamahal Hill. No one cares. Which I think is sad, because I quite enjoyed Jamahal Hill's most recent one against Glover Teixeira. I thought he looked really good, but everyone was just like, yeah, stop being a hater. Let these people have their moments. And also, calling out Tom Aspinall is really hilarious, because you are a guy who cuts to 205, and Tom Aspinall couldn't cut to 220. He's fucking gigantic. Speaking of Tom Aspinall, not an awful lot to say about this fight, because a lot of it hinged on the fact that Tom Aspinall, we all found out suddenly that Tom Aspinall has an iron chin, because he did make the mistake of stepping in, throwing punches, and then standing there. And Sergei Pavlovich's answer to having punches bounce off his head was to throw punches back. And he cracked Aspinall. But what Aspinall did was, he came out and immediately threw the naked right low kick after everyone going, oh, if he does this against Pavlovich, that'll be bad. Because people have really read into that Curtis Blades fight probably too much. But, the way that he won the fight, aside from having a great chin, was low kicks and circling. Because when you circle, you make it hard for the guy to punch, or to punch you without running up to you. And he runs up to you and you stop and throw punches in his grill, you've got a great chance of hitting him while he's wide open. But if you're circling and kicking the leg, you make it very hard for him. He has to keep turning to face you, and then in the course of that, you can slot your own punches in, and that's what Tom Aspinall did, and he knocked him out. I don't know if anyone expected him to knock him out with punches, but it wasn't... talking about it like that makes it sound like, oh, he went punch for punch with Sergei Pavlovich and did it that way. But no, the low kicks were a huge part of it, and the movement was a huge part of it. Those are things that Sergei Aspinall doesn't face generally and doesn't use himself. Hooray for Tom Aspinall, though. Seems like a great dude and has had very entertaining fights. And is a heavyweight who can actually do a bit of everything. I say that, but now if he does fight John Jones and immediately gets like ankle picked, because Cyril Gane was a guy who seemed like he could do a bit of everything and strike really well, and just got immediately manhandled. It's a very bad division, if I'm honest, but this was really interesting because Tom Aspinall was very open about the fact that he was scared shitless, which I think is a very respectable position. You got people like Mike Tyson will come out and say that. They'll say like, he said Customato taught him that fear is something to be channeled and used. And if you're not scared, you're doing something wrong. But like that bit where they did the stare down, him and Aspinall and Pavlovich, and they both put their arms on each other, that was very weird. Like he was clearly feeling very weird at that time. And then afterwards they said like, do you think you'll fight him again? He's like, yeah, he's going to knock out loads of other people and then I'm going to have to fight him again. It's very refreshing to have some realism in people, because the easiest thing in the world, if you beat someone who you actually respect, is to be like, they're trash and they don't deserve another fight with me. I always say this too, like, the more you respect someone as a fighter, or the more you're concerned about them, chin them early. Just try and take their head off early, because they'll think like, we're both fighters of an elite level. He wouldn't just bum rush me. And secondly, if you do it quickly, people won't ever, like, they'll have to do so much to earn another shot at you, because people just won't ever consider, like, Cub Swanson's my classic example. Very, very good fighter. Loads of great wins. Jose Aldo kneed him in the head in 5 seconds or whatever it was. And then for years, even when Swanson was on winning streaks in the featherweight division, people were like, not interested, seen it once already. And you're like, oh yeah, he's just going to do the same flying knee again, is he? Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern. Pretty funny. People seem like all over the map on their reads on Mackenzie Dern. She has a really good jab, and she still does. If you watched her use it in this fight, she's got a good jab, and that's what Pereira taught her. I always complain, go back and listen to any other podcast about Mackenzie Dern. I'm like, she's got this great jab, but anytime she throws her right hand, she gets wildly out of position. Turns out that they were actually working on that, because the moment she left Jason Pereira, she's just running as soon as she throws her right hand. Fucking terrible striking. And, someone that's probably being intimidated by the power of Jessica Andrade, but Mackenzie Dern hits hard enough that she could have hurt Jessica Andrade, and if she'd circled and used her brain and done good boxing things, she'd probably have beaten her on the feet. Or at least been able to box into good takedowns, but immediately grabbed her head and arm and threw her, and that was something she did against Angie Hill, and I was going, oh, this is bad when that happened. But I've read some amazing takes on the head and arm this week because Matt Brown said women need to stop using it because it's trash. And there's dudes on Reddit trying to convince themselves that because the body types are different and women are lower center of gravity, blah, blah, blah. You're like, no, it's not about whether it works. It's the fact that when it doesn't work, you give up your back and people go for it like 100 times a fight. And like women's MMA fights in the UFC are just a series of reversals as they take each other's back by accident. If you're hitting bad head and arm throws and you're thinking, well, it's okay because our center of gravities are lower, it doesn't change the fact you're doing a fucking bad head and arm throw and the person's coming up on your back. But what she did was she did the head and arm throw and she immediately tried to step over as high as possible. She threw her leg over like Dricus du Plessis did to Rob Whittaker. Because when du Plessis stepped over, he got Rob Whittaker grabbed the half guard and was like, oh, I've got the underhook and the half guard now. And actually that slowed him down. If he hadn't grabbed the half guard and he just rolled to his belly, he'd have been coming up on a single. But because he was like, I'm going to do this methodically, you can deal with an underhook from half guard. You know, the guy's not turned up to his knees yet. He's got to get his leg out again to do that. And you can start using the overhook. And of course, Dricus du Plessis dropped some elbows on him, threatened the DARS. There's loads of stuff you can do from the overhook, especially when striking is involved. But she missed. She threw her leg over and it went over. Jessica Andrade turned in and she ended up stepping over Jessica Andrade's shoulder. And that basically means that you can't pin someone down. If you watch Ryan Hall's most recent series on Deep Half, it's really good. But he talks about like just basically you get on your side and you have the opponent sitting on your delt. And that's a position where they really can't hold you down or pin you. You can roll back, you can rock back and forward and start wrestling up. And the same thing happened actually in Borshev versus Sadikov. Sadikov kept getting him down and he'd hurt him. So he's rushing to mount. And every time he steps over Borshev's arm and sits on his shoulder, and then Borshev just rolls up to his feet. There was a nice 1-2 to inside reach, which I put in the post-fight breakdown because I thought that was cool. But mostly this was Mackenzie Dern running in with her chin up in the air. And the way that like the chin up in the air was the thing that Rogan pointed out and DC pointed out because it's very obvious. But the running, the feet just, you throw your head forwards and then your feet catch up. That was what caused her a lot of problems because the first time that she gets quote unquote dropped is a left hook as she's charging in, throwing punches. And the commentators were like, oh, she just got hit on the chin with a clean left hook. She didn't. She got hit on the shoulder. But because she was so far out of position, she got thrown to the ground by it. I always bring up Demetrius Johnson versus John Dodson 1 and TJ Dillashaw versus John Dodson 1. But if you shift a lot or if you, whether it's like good technical shifting or just running in because you have bad striking, if your feet are moving out of stance a lot and you get clipped, you've got a great chance of falling over. And in this sport, that means the other person can jump on you and start hitting you in the head. But the thing that I do want to shout out Jessica Andrade for, because I'm always complaining about Jessica Andrade and how she never changes, and she's got so much physical potential, but so little technical, so few technical adaptations, and so little growth as a technician over these, 30 fights in the UFC or whatever she's had. She did throw a 1-3-2, which is a beautiful combination, 1 for finishing and 2 for cutting off the ring. If someone starts circling around to your lead side, you flick the jab in their face, you come round the side with the left hook or the right hook sometimes or the right hook if you're a southpaw and they're going to your right, so that it brings their arms out by the side of their head, and then you shoot the right straight down through the goalposts and you knock them down, hopefully. Good examples of this. I think Matt Brown did it to someone, maybe Mike Swick, or maybe I'm misremembering that fight. Conor McGregor did it to Diego Brandao to finish him, but southpaw, obviously. So Brandao was going to his right. But yeah, that was really cool to see from Jessica Andrade. Sometimes she shows up and she just shows something new for a fight. Like when she turned up against Rose for the second time, she's using loads of head movement. And I was told that like her and her boxing coach had been watching loads of Henry Armstrong, which is really cool. Real old school reference. Almost 4-division champion in the days when it was full divisions, not in between of it, tweener divisions. But then the next fight, it was gone. Occasionally she shows an inside low kick, and then the next fight, it's gone. Because I remember back when she was fighting fucking Jessica Penne, I was like, this girl, if she had an inside low kick, she could cut the ring and actually hurt people. Or actually get to the people she can hurt when she hits them. But yeah, I said it on Twitter, but she should be rich. She's done so much in the UFC, for the UFC. She should be rich, but she's had a very bad divorce. But even before that, like she was being made to go on OnlyFans by her management. Despite really not wanting to. It's just Whole situation's fucked, mate. But she should be paid more because she's the only woman who's not Amanda Nunes, who's now retired, finishing people regularly with knockouts. She's been there for 20-something fights. She's been there for 10 years. And she's been a world champion. Meanwhile, Mackenzie Dern, whereas Jessica Andrade seems to have been held back by marriage and become better with her dreadful divorce, Mackenzie Dern, she seems like she needs someone in her life to make her better. And I think that someone needs to be Jason Pereira. That was the storyline all week, the divorces. Benoit Saint-Denis, Matt Frevola, great fight, didn't last long enough. Classic Benoit Saint-Denis, learned MMA so quickly to a world-class level that he does some very tricky things, which are obviously what make him so special. So his ring cutting and his left kick to the body and his left straight and how he puts pressure on people, amazing. And then Matt Frevola shoots a takedown and he jumps a guillotine. And you're like, oh yeah, no, that's real low IQ stuff there. And then he'll rebound and do something cool again. So Frevola takes him down, opens the guard, steps over to start driving his way to half guard. And Benoit Saint-Denis butterfly sweeps him on the opposite side using a grapevine and switching the underhook. It was so slick. I wrote about it in the article. Not going to be able to describe it here, but it's one of the best butterfly sweeps I've seen. One of the best butterfly sweeps I've seen all year. And the additional grapevine component, very cool too. But then immediately got taken down again. And he got up in the style that Damian Maia used to. He'd get an underhook, whether it was from guard, from full guard or half guard. He'd get the underhook, get up on his hand, sit to that S-legs position, the pigeon stretch, and then drive into the guy and come up to his knees. And it was his one-size-fits-all. This guy had submitted so many people from his back in jiu-jitsu and so many people from butterfly guard and used his X-guard so well and his single-leg X-guard. The moment that he started succeeding in MMA is because he just sat up, got the underhook, and drove to his knees. And then a head kick on the break knocks out Frevola. Frevola, I thought he was sort of overachieving on this run because he's sort of just a tough guy who throws hard and scrambles. But this was always going to be my favourite fight of the night, I felt. And it did live up to expectations. I wish it had gone a bit longer. I think they were really fun going back and forward. Diego Lopez versus Pat Sabatini. Great takedown defense from Lopez. Dinged Sabatini a little bit, and Sabatini just went wild chasing a single leg or a takedown or something like that. And Lopez framed, used his head post, turned him, hit him on the break, and then Sabatini took a worse takedown attempt and he knocked him out. Another one that was a banger. I knew it would be a banger, but I wish it went longer. Anything else good on this card? Sadikov versus Borshev was terrific. Sadikov, I think might have let himself down a bit here because for the whole of round 2 and most of round 3, he looked great, and he just sort of let Borshev get back into the fight enough to get the draw on the card. But he looked great. The thing was that this is another one of those ones where someone did the right thing and then they got hurt just because he didn't pay off. So he's walking forward, slipping punches with his head coming towards Borshev's chest every time. And Borshev sees this and circles around, and as Sadikov's stepping up to him, he throws a knee. And it dings him on the side of the chin, but it doesn't knock him out. And then Borshev's on one leg and gets hit with a punch coming back. And it's like, yeah, you did a smart thing, but you still got hit in the head on one leg and now you're in trouble. It's a hard game. Even if you do the right stuff in fighting, you're still only increasing your odds so much. You can still get dinged with weird punches from any sort of position. And then one of my favourite fights of the night actually was, I'll mention Emma's versus Bazukcha, because that was where Alex Pereira's low kicking and retreating and circling out was good. There are so many guys who still throw a low kick with their back to the fence and then get blasted. Because the moment your back's against the fence, you don't have anywhere to go. So if the other guy steps out the middle, you're in trouble. You can't slide back and correct the distance and kick properly. You're going to pick a bad kick, basically. You're going to kick at a bad time and the guy's just going to step in on you. And that's what happened. But one of my favourite fights of the night was actually Jared Gordon versus Mark Madsen, who DC and Joe Rogan didn't seem to know that his name's not O Madsen. It's the middle initial, Mark O, full stop, period, whatever you want to call it. Madsen, not Marco Madsen. And Anik kept saying it like, Madsen, hint. But Madsen is really interesting because he's obviously an Olympic silver medalist in Greco. It's another one of those, he's basically the wrestling equivalent of Leo Santos, a guy who reached the pinnacle of his own grappling sport and then came over to MMA and didn't quite get enough fights done soon enough And now he's like an old man, and you're going like, oh, it's a shame. He's never going to be big. He's never going to make it to like title contention. There's still big things in his game that he's not going to have time to fix. But man, wouldn't it have been great if people aged 10 years slower? If you could have a fighting career into your 50s reasonably, it'd be so interesting to watch this guy develop. But it obviously can't happen. Interesting piece of trivia from Anik in this fight. Sometimes people get annoyed about the Anik trivia, but I really like this one about Gordon's dad. Sorry, Gordon's granddad was a boxer who boxed 4 times at Madison Square Garden, which I presume is the old Madison Square Garden because we're on like the 4th iteration of it now. But and Madsen was due to wrestle at Madison Square Garden on the weekend of 9/11, so that got cancelled and he never did. And I just thought that was a really interesting connection from both to the place through 2 different sports. But Madsen was coming in looking for the single collar tie with his left hand and then throwing right uppercuts and right knees. And dirty boxing is a real hard one. Go watch Randy Couture's career. It was real basic stuff. It was like collar tie, punches, switch to the other collar tie, punches, elbows, knees. But there's still not enough guys doing it well. It's not been nearly as exploited as it should be. It's a real... someone was doing it masterfully last week. Who was I raving about? But Leon Edwards is obviously one of the best in the world at dirty boxing, or at least on the break in counter to takedowns. And obviously he's, world champion at the moment. But it's sort of a unique, because so few guys are looking for it actively, it's sort of a unique fight played out because they were getting very close to each other and Marco Madsen was reaching out. And you saw Gordon would go both hands on Madsen's wrists and just push him off, which of course doesn't happen if you're boxing in. But Madsen kept getting that left collar tie and hammering in right uppercuts, and Gordon worked it out fairly quickly, just like John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier was holding the left collar tie and hammering guys with these bus driver uppercuts, and John Jones just went 2 hands on that other hand. If you got both your hands free, he's got one hand free because his other hand is holding you. So you go both hands on that wrist, you push it into their belly, which is what Jared Gordon was doing here. And you can just wait because if he takes his left hand off to throw it at you, you can break away. If he wants to keep the clinch, as Madsen clearly wanted to, he has to do something about it. So Gordon would tie up that one hand, and then the great thing about it was by pushing it into Madsen's belly, he could then free one of his hands and hit with it. So the ending sequence, he pins Madsen's hand to his belly while Madsen's holding him with the other hand. He frees his right hand and hits him with a right uppercut that wobbles Madsen, chases him to the fence. They play out the hand fight again. He gets his 2 hands on one, and then he hits him with an elbow with his left hand, or left arm, to start the knockout. It was a really interesting little fight just for the hand fighting stuff. And Madsen tries to do the DC mummy guard thing where he extends his right hand out in the open. He extends his right hand to check Gordon's left hand because Gordon's landing the jab. And very few people use it in boxing. George Foreman, Sandy Sadler, Jay Johnson, that's about your lot. Lots of people use it in Muay Thai, obviously, because you can check both of someone's hands and step in with a knee or throw a kick or turn over an elbow. But one of the interesting things about it in boxing is that if you extend your hands onto the opponent's hand, you take away the straight line to the target. So they have to drop their hands and come around the side, which is obviously very, very slow for boxing. So it makes it very easy to defend yourself because you just have to duck the looping punches. But Madsen checks the jab. Gordon just drops his hand and swings around a big left hook, and Madsen stands there and just takes it. Because, what it does is it takes away the fastest weapon and it makes the guy use slower weapons, but you still have to be alert and aware and dealing with those slower weapons when they go to them. It gives you an advantage, but if you don't understand how to use that advantage, you don't really gain much from it. So that was UFC 295. It was great. Let's talk about some of the stuff happening this weekend. Your UFC card, your regularly scheduled UFC slop, is an Apex card, obviously, and it's Brendan Allen versus Paul Craig in the main event. 2 of the least main event fighters I would ever think of, but good enough. I mean, one's a top 10 middleweight and one's top 15? And one was a moderately successful light heavyweight coming down who has a win over the champion, so that's not bad. Probably just a matchup of jits and probably just Brendan Allen boxing him up on the feet, to be honest. I mean, we already had Brendan Allen versus Andre Muniz, where the story was just like, do well enough on the ground that this guy can't actually stop you. And then you can tire him out and, it wouldn't surprise me if he beat Paul Craig on the ground. Other people have. Jimmy Crute did a great job of just roughing Paul Craig up on the ground. Paul Craig's striking is literally just kicks. His hands did look a bit better since moving to higher level with my boy Jimmy Doolin. But most of it is kicks and frames, which we're always a big fan of, but Allen's actually pretty decent on the feet. So yeah, it's an okay matchup. I've been wanting to do like a filthy casuals guide to like the unranked middleweights for a while, because while the division is pretty arse, as in like the top end of it is Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis, someone put up a picture of like 8 unranked middleweights who are all really interesting and have very unique styles. I thought it might be fun to do a filthy casuals quick rundown of like what they do each. But we'll see. We'll see whether I do that. Co-main event, Jake Matthews. That's how desperate we are. Versus Michael Morales. Morales, big banger. I thought his last one, who was that? That was Max Griffin, was kind of tentative. Jake Matthews convinced he's a striker, but really more of a grappler, unless people just sort of like wade towards him with their chin up in the air. Jordan Levitt versus Chase Hooper. That'll actually be fun. 2 jiu-jitsu nerds just going off. Jordan Levitt, big listener of the podcast. He didn't ask me anything on Reddit yesterday. And someone said, "Are you a slacky boy?" And he said, "Yeah." Hang on, I'll read you the answer. Because it was simultaneously really nice to read, but also made me feel 100 years old. Jordan says, "Jack Slack is one of the main reasons I made it to the UFC. I've been following him since high school." This 30-year-old man's been following me since high school. That makes you feel uniquely decrepit. But I think that'll be, I think that could turn into like one of those ugly brawls on the feet or a really bad kickboxing match. But if it turns into the kind of grappling contest that we normally like, Chase Hooper, pretty game to grapple with anyone, and Levitt has also historically been game to grapple with anyone. But I really enjoyed Hooper's last one. To be honest, I enjoyed Levitt's. I even enjoyed the Paddy Pimblett-Levitt fight, which was pretty good. He got back in the winning column by beating Victor Martinez in the first round. Actually knocked him out, which was crazy. I think his only other knockout was when he slammed Matt Wyman on the back of his head, which was hilarious. But Hooper coming off that win over Nick Fiore. Levitt's pretty okay on the feet, whereas Chase... Actually, no, I'm lying. Chase Hooper looked better in his last one. I quite enjoyed what he did. And I think I wrote something about it after it anyway. Anything else good on that card? Amanda Ribas is fighting Luana Pinheiro. Don't care. Jonathan Pierce versus Joe Anderson Brito might be fun. And Charles Johnson, I always like to keep an eye on him because against Muhammad Makayev, like Muhammad Makayev takes down and holds down everyone, and Charles Jordan just kept getting up. On Christian Leroy Duncan, I'm keeping an eye on because he had a good fight and then a not so good fight. But they matched him against Dennis Tululin, who is pretty bummed here, to be honest. Dennis Tululin made Jamie Pickett look decent. Real fight heads like me found out yesterday that there's a Bellator event on, but that's what we're watching this weekend. Bellator 301, actually really good. But like I said, the way these play out, probably not. But you've got main event between Yaroslav Amosov and Jason Jackson. Amosov, very, very good. His last one was against Logan Storley. Looked great against a very one-dimensional wrestler. Before that, he beat Douglas Lima in pretty impressive fashion. He's about the best thing going outside the UFC. That's a lie. There are actually guys in lower divisions who are more interesting than him. But he's one of the guys. Some people convince themselves that he could be like UFC champion. I think Leon Edwards probably works him for 4 out of 5 rounds and then somehow nearly loses in the 5th. But, if he ever wants to fight real competition, I'd be excited to see it. Jason Jackson, in fairness to him, has been working a long time to get this shot. He hasn't lost since 2019. He lost a split decision to Ed Ruth, actually, which was close. But if you go back to like real losses, you could say Hayder Hassan is his last loss in 2013 because he had an injury versus Carl Stewart and split decision loss versus Ed Ruth. But he's been doing about as well as you can do in Bellator. His current run is Kunimoto, Jordan Mean, who's, not ancient, but ancient in fight years. Benson Henderson, who's both. Neyman Gracie, who's kind of one-dimensional, and Paul Daly, who had 1 foot out the door anyway. And then Douglas Lima, he beat in his last one, which was crazy, because we used to think Douglas Lima was good, but Douglas Lima, genuinely, the Bellator Tyron Woodley, he just stopped doing things. What the hell has Larkin been up to? He was undefeated for a very long time and never got a title. Oh, I suppose he was jumping around weights. He did some middleweight stuff, and then he came back down to welterweight to beat Berkimov. Oh, he lost to Koreshkov on the Rising card. I didn't watch that. I did watch some of that Rising card, but I didn't watch him lose to Koreshkov. That seemed crazy because Koreshkov is shot. But then that card was basically put together at the last minute anyway. That's why he had Pitbull fighting on 3 weeks' notice, 2 weight classes up from where he just competed 3 weeks before. But yeah, Amosov versus Jackson. I mean, Jackson is game, and it would be great fun to see him win this, just because like people do put so much praise on Amosov for beating not great opponents. But Amosov is very slick, measured on the outside, very strong, competent wrestler on the inside. Yeah, it's right. The crazy thing is the co-main event, Patchy Mix versus Sergio Pettis for the bantamweight title. They did a bantamweight Grand Prix. The winner was supposed to win the belt because Sergio Pettis was in the Grand Prix. They pulled Sergio Pettis from the Grand Prix so that he could fight Patricio Pitbull to try and give Patricio Pitbull a third weight title. And then Patricio Pitbull came in looking emaciated and lost. So Patchy Mix ran through this tournament and didn't get the real belt. They gave him an interim belt. Hilarious. The most Bellator thing in the world would be for Sergio Pettis to win here and look impressive because he was so mid in the UFC, and since he got to Bellator, he's beaten like their longtime bantamweight champion Juan Archuleta by just never letting him get a shot in edgeways, and then beat Pitbull very decisively too, and then scored the first finish of about a decade of his career by knocking out Koji Horiguchi in probably Koji Horiguchi's best performance up until the random back kick or back fist or whatever it was that knocked him out. So brain says Patchy Mix, but heart says Sergio Pettis. Or cynical side of me says Sergio Pettis. But Patchy Mix, a very interesting fighter because he is so tall and long for the weight class. He's giant. And he's been taking people down, getting on their backs and strangling them. Or even guillotining Magomed Magomedov. But then he came out and scored the first knockout of his career against Rufian Stotts in the final of the tournament. Just by reading him. He was like, this guy's much shorter than me. He's going to duck his head. I'm going to knee him. And he did. And knocked him out. It was fantastic. I think standing on the outside with Sergio Pettis is probably a bad decision. He should be looking to get to the clinch at every opportunity. And if Sergio Pettis drops his head at any point, smashing the knee. But fanning around on the outside against Sergio, he is actually pretty clean. And when I say getting in on him, I mean like get him to the fence and use that as your weapon. Or use the fence to corral him and get the clinches. Because Juan Archuleta just ran straight at him on a line for 5 rounds. You know, he'd circle, run in on a line, and Sergio Pettis would slide back and throw the right hand. Just this backsliding right straight, and every time Juan Archuleta's head was right there. Stotts versus Sabatello. What is this, 3? He beat him by split last time. Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because they got Rufian Stotts, because they got Danny Sabatello in a position where people care about him, but don't want to see him fight because he's incredibly boring. But if you have this rivalry going on with Stotts, people will watch him. AJ McKee versus Sydney Outlaw. AJ McKee continues campaigning at 155. And then you got Shabley versus Patricky Pitbull in the tournament, the lightweight tournament, which has been a unmitigated disaster, especially with Usman Nurmagomedov testing positive recently on a commission test, even funnier, because like his teammates are all passing USADA, even though USADA's probably not getting out to Dagestan much. But the Bellator rules and regs guy just came out and said, look, it's not important, it's not doping, so it's going to be a 6-week suspension and we'll be back to it. And it's like, oh, it's not important. Tell us what the substance was then, dickhead. It's like when guys get caught using masking agents or whatever, and they go, I got caught taking a drug to raise my epitestosterone? Why would I do that? That won't positively affect my performance. But Shabley versus Pitbull, this is about the last chance to stop the tournament from just becoming the weirdest, silliest thing they've done. Because this tournament was so cool looking at the start. And then Shabley took out Tafik Masayev, who was one of the exciting newcomers. Brent Primus took out Mansour Barnoui, who looked rusty as hell from 3 years off, and then just laid on his back trying to headlock him. And then Brent Primus lost easily to Usman Nurmagomedov, but that was changed into a no contest because of the drugs that Nurmagomedov did, but apparently they're not important, even though it's important enough that it was turned into a no contest. So yeah, Brent Primus versus Patricky Pitbull, 2 of the guys who've been here since the start, would be the funniest way for this to end. But Shabley is really good. If you've never seen him, I think he was the ACA/ACB champion. Brilliant body kicks, brilliant setups, lots of fakes, good counters. Yeah, I mean, you know, you'll enjoy it. And then the rest of that card, anything interesting? No, not really. No post limbs listed, though. So they may actually be genuinely finishing this one. As in, like, this might be the last Bellator event. Who will be my foe then? Do I have to learn about Combate Americas or some shit? Do I have to go out of my way to pirate the PFL events that are almost impossible to find in the UK? Anything else going on this weekend? The other Inoue brother, who is just as talented but doesn't hit very hard, is fighting. Shakur Stevenson's fighting. And at Rise 173, there's a women's title fight. Meh. And the final to some tournament for a vacant title. Meh. You know that Bellator 301 is going to underperform, so fingers crossed for the UFC Brendan Allen versus Paul Craig banger to overperform. And I'll be back Sunday to chat about it. In the meantime, watching tons of Roberto Duran. Going to write my Advanced Striking 2.0 on him soon. If you want to get in on all the extra shit, read the How Alex Pereira Killed the King. And support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Paul Craig's Highland Half Guard bless.